first petal. The second, third, and fourth petals, the three that come after that, can be considerably smaller because they're going to share the duty of going all the way around that flower. They're all the way around that bud. So it's not going to take nearly as much gum paste. And if you go to 5 after that, they can be even a little bit smaller. Must have eaten lunch quickly today, huh? All right. So like usual, we'll keep my gum paste in the bag so it's not going to get dry on me. I thought I had a spoon up here. There's a spoon next time, please. Thank you. Just like anything else, I'll work quickly here, but when I get going, I just start going fairly fast with this. I'm still focusing on keeping my edge very thin and keeping the base a little bit thicker. Well, with gum paste, we're going to be gluing it on, so it's not going to require it to be quite as thick on the bottom as normal. This is a fairly thin petal, fairly large. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. If I want to make sure that it's really thin, I can come over here and get a ball tool, and I can thin it out even more. Let's say I want to make sure this is like just paper thin on the edge. I can take my ball tool and really, really fan it out, really get it really thin so it does a wonderful job. If you like it ruffled, if you want to have any sort of variation in shape, that can be done as well. Anytime you want to get some variation in shape, there's any sort of round tool. I've got these little things called cell pin. If you ever want to make a ruffle, all you have to do is take your cell pin and roll it along, and I think you'll find that things ruffle pretty quickly. You roll toward the edge and roll it back, and it will cause the edge to curl up. As you can see, really paper thin on the very edge, but I don't know if you can see that, but it's translucent, and it's a lot thicker down in here to keep it, give it a little more support. When we get ready to put this on our little cell bud, I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the entire cell bud, just a little bit. I just want to moisten it so that the whole thing is sticky. Remember, this thing's still made of sugar, so it's going to get sticky when water hits it, any sort of moisture. A tiny bit on my petal here to kind of moisten that a little bit. And then I'm going to wipe off, because I remember that if I get any gum glue on the outside of the rose, it's going to form like a very slick coating, and it's not going to allow any color to stick to it. So I'm going to try to make sure my fingers are dry, and I'm going to try to avoid getting any glue on the outside of this so I can get color to adhere to it. When it comes to setting this up, just like you do normally, you'll go ahead and wrap your first petal around. I'm going to wrap this around so it's really snug around the whole thing. Poor Dorothy. Bad case of the hiccups. So for those of you who are having difficulty seeing it all, you can see I've wrapped it all the way around nice and tight, trying to get it so it'll really cover that bud. And I'm making sure that I can't see the bud at all on the top. And then I've still got quite a bit of glue here that's showing. And what I'm going to do is just wrap this on around, trying to keep this very thin very thin petal going straight up, so it'll give me the effect, the kind of a visual effect that I'm looking for. And if you run out of space with glue on it, all you have to do is come back around, a little bit of glue, put it on here to moisten your petal, and just keep working it around until you're satisfied with how it's attached. Now, personally, I like that. I just like how it ruffles its way up and around. I like the effect of that. For those of you who can see that from where you are, it's got a pretty interesting looking profile. And I think the top could probably use a little work here, just to kind of close in a little bit better. But let's get ready for the next three. I'll just do these three, you know, set you guys loose to do your own thing. Once you get used to working with this material, you work fairly quickly. You'll find yourself just cruising right along. But, you know, I'm careful, but I'm also aware of how much time I take to do things. And the reason why, because partly I've got, you know, all of you watching right now and waiting for me to kind of get on with it. But if I'm in a business situation, if I'm working in the field, I have deadlines to be aware of. So I have to make sure that I'm not taking too long to do anything. So you have to, it takes practice to be able to work quickly and get the job done, and yet still do really good quality work. I even noticed this when we were watching Ron Ben Israel in that video I showed you. Ron was, you know, he's really a bit of a control freak. And as he was working, you know, he'd be looking at this flower he made, and he'd start messing with the petals, and oh, I think this one could go over there. And then finally, I could see his hands. He finally goes, you know, he finally said, okay, enough, because he knows himself. He knows how anal he can be, and he knows that if he keeps going, he'll just keep going and going and dragging himself up the wall. I don't like to get to that point, so I think he's learned too that where he can do that, and I can do that too. So I got to be careful I just don't overdo it. This one's nice and paper thin already. I think if I use the ball tool at all, I may just give it a little bit of enhancement just to make sure it's thin. This next petal is going to be first of three. A little bit of moisture. Right now, while the gum glue is still soft, I can go ahead and make quite a few changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this on here. I'm trying to make sure that they're going to be about the same height as the original petal. This is really, really thin. But because they're so thin, because you can get them so thin, they dry out quickly too. So you kind of have to be aware of how fast you're working so that you can get it before it dries out. Same procedure though, just like before. We're going to put this other one just inside of the second one, or the first one. Actually, open that up just a little bit, slide it in. That second one on there. Go for the third. It looks pretty nice and thin. Now, what causes the problem with roses is that now you're adding all these different petals and layers of gum glue. What's going to happen is everything's going to get kind of heavy and wet. So after you do this first set of petals here, this first three, you may find that things are starting to get kind of slimy. That's moving around a little too much for my taste. Gently pull that one off. Open it up a little more. Stick it back in and wrap it around. Things start getting slimy on you and you're like, well, this is going to really start getting difficult. Maybe it's time to set it aside to dry for a little bit. These thin little petals are going to dry fairly quickly. And because of that, you're not going to have to wait long. So let's say you want to let it dry for half an hour. That's okay. Let it dry for half an hour. When it does that, and it has a chance to dry, this gum glue will start to firm up. And it's going to start to get easier to work with. Right now the bottom isn't looking its best. I'm making a few shifts, a few little changes here to how things are aligned. But as you work, if you find it getting a little bit slimy on you, let's put it aside. Let's go ahead and let it dry. You can do other things in the meantime. Things like coloring your stephanotis, coloring your forget-me-nots, and so forth.
I was about to ask if you pinch that.
I'm pinching it a little bit. I think what I'm going to do is leave that little bit on the bottom there. I can always pinch off the rest later. But while I'm going to let it dry, right now it's a little misshapen. I don't like how it's shaped. So I'm going to go in here with a little cell pin just to open things up, get things where I want them to be. So when they dry intact, where I like them, where I like the look of them. That I'm pretty happy with right there. So, if I want to let it dry, I can just, I can do a couple things. I could set it in here. I do this. I bend my wire over so it's a little wider and it slides right to the cell pad real easily and just sits there. I can sit and dry for a little bit while the gum glue firms up. If I've got time now, I can just go ahead and clean up my station. I can also color my stephanotis, my forget-me-nots, start working on my leaves. By the time I'm doing all that stuff, I'll be ready to put another layer on this. And I can go for 5 petals if I want. But the idea here is that do it in stages. I drew this little picture on the board to describe that to the students this morning, where I basically said that you start off with this first layer. And you put that first petal on, and then let's say you put on your second petal, your third petal, your fourth petal, and now you've got glue in here, you've got glue in here, you've got glue in here. All this is getting gluey and wet. So what we need to do is give it a little time so that glue can soak in little by little into your cone and into these layers and start to dry, start to evaporate away. When that starts to happen and starts to get firmer, it's easier to work with. Sometimes if it's really a pain, you might get to this far. I might get this far and say, look, I'm not going to mess with this until Monday because I don't think I can get this to dry fast enough. So you may find there will be a couple of you that might do that. That might get to a point where you realize that it's not getting any better and it's just going to make it more difficult for me. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and let this one be until Monday and then go do other things. In the meantime, I think you'll find sometimes that works out better. It just depends on the flower and how much moisture you're putting on your petals. If you're keeping the moisture small, just so it's tacky and sticky, it'll usually dry up fairly quickly. But if it's fairly wet, this will start to build up in here and create a real problem. Now right now it looks a little long, but I'm going to be trimming this off in the bottom. I'm going to probably pinch this off even a little more than what we see right now and start to create a little more of a rounded shape for the bottom of this rose. When I do that, all I do is I go around and around and I just work it down until I work it slowly until I get down to the bottom. And eventually I can be confident that I can just pull it away. I can gently put that in place. When it comes time to put on a calyx, calyxes are really easy, but calyxes basically are just a piece of leaf, like a leaf that goes on the bottom of your rose. And all you do is you take a calyx cutter. I have 3 different sizes of calyx cutters, and you'll find this one's probably the biggest one. But that's for a fairly big rose. This is for almost big rose. This would probably be a good size for this one. I also have some smaller ones. I have these little half pint size, and I have even the little quarter pint size if you have some really tiny roses. But what you do is you roll out some green, you cut it out. I usually put this calyx, after it's been cut, on my board, and I'll go and take my ball tool, and I'll just make adjustments if I need to. Basically beveling down the sides to make them look a little sharper, and making adjustments to it. And then I'll slide it on the bottom of my wire until it comes up in contact with my rose. I first put a little glue on it, and it glues right into place. And then from there, it can be manipulated. On this one, you can see that what I've done is I turned the ends of them and curled them down a little bit. And that turned out pretty good. That looks pretty nice. I'm not done yet, of course. The calyx could still use some more color. So could the rose, but you guys can pass that around if you like. I've got that one.